Hey everyone, let's dive right into this fascinating explainer on how human reality and our deepest beliefs are actually constructed. Today, we're taking a seriously mind-bending deep dive into the work of author Marcus Heinrich Ribak, specifically his text, Entertaining Beliefs, Zen Humane Skepticism for Homo Fido. Think of this as a profound look at how our minds are programmed by society, and more importantly, how we can supposedly edit that programming, just like software, using his trademarked and copyrighted ZenLP method. We're going to explore everything from massive philosophical shifts all the way down to the tiny involuntary twitches of the human eye.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to logically unpack this complex theory layer by layer. We'll start with the epistemological shift, look at dogmas as protection rackets, define Homo Fideo, break down the coding of beliefs, and finally, check out the ZenLP method in action.
To really ground our exploration, Ribak defines modern humans as Homo Fido, arguing that we're socially conditioned to trade our freedom for the mere illusion of safety. Homo Fido, or believing man, is his term for an individual who has been completely captured by external narratives. Ribak argues this is a person who will literally abandon their own principles and empirical observations in exchange for protection from threats that are entirely fabricated. It's kind of like paying for a premium subscription service you can't cancel for a problem you didn't even know you had.
Ribak has a fantastic quote that brilliantly illustrates his primary goal. He wants to provide a methodology to completely step outside of our dominant societal conditioning. He urges us to stop treating our beliefs as absolute, unquestionable truths, and instead recognize them as a carefully constructed mind prison. But, to escape a prison, you first have to figure out how the walls are built. And in Ribak's framework, the very foundation of those walls is a massive flaw in how we perceive reality itself.
That brings us to Section 1, the epistemological shift. Let's see how this whole theory builds from a fundamental change in how we perceive reality, a shift heavily inspired by the philosopher David Hume.
Ribak actually argues that traditional cause and effect, it's a total illusion. Instead, he states we merely witness a series of interactions and outcomes. Drawing on David Hume's skepticism, Ribak points out that we never actually see one thing cause another. Say you drop a glass and it shatters, you immediately think gravity caused the break. But Ribak insists that, mathematically and observably speaking, we only see the interaction of the glass and the floor and the resulting outcome. Dropping this illusion of cause and effect is absolutely crucial. It's the first major step in freeing the mind because it stops us from blindly accepting the narratives authorities feed us about why things happen.
To explain this, he uses the analogy of analog film frames. He says our minds basically stitch together localized impressions in time and space to falsely assume a continuous, fixed reality. Think about a really old strip of analog film. It's just a series of still, totally separate photographs, right? But when you play them in rapid succession, your brain fills in the gaps, creating a smooth, continuous, moving image. Ribak argues that our brains do the exact same thing with our sensory input. We take these localized, static impressions and stitch them together, assigning a permanent identity to things that are actually constantly changing. We literally mistake the movie for reality.
Moving right along to Section 2, dogmas as protection rackets. Ribak applies this philosophical skepticism directly to our societal structures. Because once you realize continuous reality is just a mental construct, you start to see exactly how institutions exploit that construct.
It's a pretty bold claim, but in this framework, both organized religions and secular states operate as protection rackets. They run a monopoly on salvation by creating imaginary threats and then turning around and selling you the cure. He argues that these priest classes, whether they're literal religious clerics offering salvation from hell or modern secular authorities offering security from terrorism, operate on the exact same structural model. They invent a threat you can't independently verify, they demand your absolute submission, and they enforce compliance by making questioning them a massive social taboo. The ultimate goal here, according to Ribak's deconstruction, is always the consolidation of power and wealth for the elite class at the expense of everyone else.
Which leads us to Section 3. Homo Fideo, or believing man. This kind of systemic control brings us right back to the prime target of these rackets, the individual.
According to the author, believing man is essentially imprisoned within an internally reflexive bubble, mistaking the protection racket's dogmas for ultimate truths. Because Homo Fideo has been raised inside this continuous loop of conditioned threats and rewards, they totally lose the ability to see the world heuristically, meaning they can no longer test and discover things for themselves. They just blindly accept the cause and effect narratives handed down to them without ever testing the actual interactions and outcomes. Basically, they become fanatics of their own conditioning rather than open-minded seekers.
So you might be wondering, what's the crucial point here?
How exactly do these massive macro-level societal dogmas rewrite the micro-level code of your individual brain? It's one thing to say society controls us, but Refbach goes so much deeper than that, exploring the exact neurological mechanisms of this control.
That brings us to Section 4, Coding Beliefs Through Sensory Submodalities. To really answer how this works, we need to pivot from sociology over to the mechanics of cognitive psychology. Reibach notes that literally all our beliefs are neurologically coded to specific sensory submodalities, like the brightness of a visual image, the volume of an auditory sound, or the weight of a kinesthetic feeling in our memories. This is where his incredible synthesis of neurolinguistic programming comes into play. You see, a belief isn't just an abstract thought. It is physically represented in your brain via your senses. When you remember a traumatic event or a limiting belief, you might construct it as a blindingly bright image, a really loud booming voice, or a heavy, crushing feeling in your chest. These are the submodalities, the specific qualities of your sensory systems. And here is the real game changer. If beliefs are just sensory code, Reibach argues that code can be edited.
Because the mind is basically like editing software, his trademarked ZenNLP method follows these exact steps to overwrite limiting beliefs during trance therapy. Think of it like opening the settings menu in your brain and literally turning down the brightness on a bad memory. But the conscious mind is stubborn, right? It guards its dogmas fiercely. So, the practitioner must first induce a deep trance state to bypass that resistance. Then, they isolate exactly how the client is coding their fear or belief. Are they seeing it, hearing it, or feeling it? Once they isolate it, the therapist helps the client overwrite those submodalities. For instance, if a limiting belief is a massive, bright image in their mind, they are guided to shrink it, dim it, and push it far away. Finally, this new, empowered state is anchored, often using a physical touch, so it can easily be triggered later in daily life. And now we reach the final layer, Section 5, the ZenPLP method. Let's look a little closer at how a practitioner actually pulls this off in reality.
Reibach explains that a ZenLP practitioner can bypass a client's stubborn conscious mind by encoding suggestions in a sensory system the client isn't actively monitoring. This is such a fascinating psychological maneuver. If a client processes the world primarily through visuals, their conscious mind acts like a guard looking exclusively for visual threats. So the ZenLP therapist will intentionally stop using visual language altogether. Instead, they'll encode their therapeutic suggestions using auditory or kinesthetic terms. Because the conscious mind is literally blind to these non-dominant channels, the suggestions slip right past the censorship and implant directly into the subconscious.
And how does the therapist know it's working? Well, they monitor success by observing subtle, involuntary biometric indicators that prove the subconscious is engaged. You see, the practitioner isn't just passively listening to what the client says, they are practicing deep Zen observation. They are intensely watching for micro-expressions. If the therapist asks a client to mentally step into an empowered state, they don't just wait for the client to say, "Oh yeah, I feel it." They look for pupil dilation, a flush in the skin tone, or a subtle shift in breathing rate. These autonomic biometric responses scream the truth far louder than words ever could. It's exactly this intense, present-moment observation that gives the Zen to ZenLP.
Ultimately, the ZenLP method is designed to truly emancipate individuals, allowing them to freely try on and discard beliefs heuristically, rather than being enslaved by them. Reibach's ultimate message here is not to just hand you a new set of dogmas to believe in. That would just be trading one mind prison for another. Instead, he wants you to become a true skeptic, someone who merely entertains beliefs for their practical utility. You adopt a belief like a tool, you use it to interact with the world and produce a positive outcome, and then you just put it down when it no longer serves you. This fluid flexibility is the ultimate antidote to being a homo fido.
So, as we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with one final thought regarding the totally subjective, constructed nature of your own mind. If society's structures are just interactive narratives, and your internal reality is just a series of highly modifiable sights, sounds, and feelings, well then the power to define reality sits entirely within you. You are the editor of your own film. The only question is, what story are you going to write? Think about that as you go through your day and start noticing the code behind your very own convictions.